Hello, folks. This is Truby Chiavello, publisher and editor of Primo Magazine, and I'm coming to you today to talk about Columbus Day. It's an ongoing subject, and a key reason why we celebrate Columbus Day. There's a variety of reasons why we celebrate Columbus Day, and on October 12th every year. But one reason that's overlooked is a virtue here in the United States, one of the characteristics of our country that makes us great, and it's directly tied to Christopher Columbus. And that's the fact that Christopher Columbus left his home. We celebrate Columbus Day, and we celebrate Christopher Columbus because he left. He got out. He left his home. He left the old world and ventured 3,100 nautical miles, which is about 3,500 regular miles, for the purpose of his own reinvention. It's the purpose of self-reinvention why we celebrate Columbus. And this is tied to the freedom of movement. You know, it's just interesting here in the United States, with the United States Constitution. And we all agree that our freedoms are what makes the United States the richest, the most powerful country the world has ever known. Before we get to the freedoms in the Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, assembly, religion, it's the freedom of mobility, state-by-state mobility, that makes us great. And that's right there in the Constitution. Article 4, Section 4. It was written, I'm sorry, Article 4, Section 2. I apologize. It's right there, right after the instructions on the separation of powers, you know, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the courts. We go right to the Article 4 and the Comity Clause, and it states that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. Now, this was written by James Madison, and this is tied to the model of Columbus, in that by leaving a state, leaving your home, and moving to another place without anybody getting in the way, without any local, state, or federal government stopping you from doing it, you can reestablish yourself in another state and reinvent yourself. And this is something that's quite unique for Americans. A lot of countries are trying to do it, but they just don't know how to do it. And the reason for that is because it's the idea of the self-made man or the self-made woman that is the backbone of the United States, the whole concept of the United States. Again, before we get to any freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of press, you need the freedom of movement. You need the freedom of mobility. You need to be able to leave your home, to leave your village, to leave your city, to leave your town, move to another state, and start all over again to better yourself. This could be for purposes for a job, for going to university, starting a business. But more than that, it's also to leave your home, go to another place where people think like you do and live like you do. You know, you come from a small village someplace, but you like the nightlife, so what do? You know, you leave and you move to Las Vegas or New York City or some other place. You live in a city, but you have an affinity for gardening, for farming. What do? You save your money, you move to another state someplace where there's ample land and it's low price, and you buy land and you cultivate and you become a farmer. And that's also something that's very important. It's the freedom or the right to own property rights, that's tied to mobility. You move to another place, you buy a home, you live there. No one can stop you. No one can stop you from doing that. No law, no government, no police can stop you from buying land, from resettling in a state where you have no connection. And that's just very unique among the United States. Europe is trying to do that now, and yet it's still not able to really do that. Russia, China, all around the world, people still have a difficult time embracing that idea of allowing you and me the freedom to go anywhere, to relocate, to resettle. That's the thing about Columbus. He was a poor man. He was a widower with a child. He had nothing. But he had a goal. He had an ambition. And it was a big ambition. And it was tied to movement. He wanted to leave where he came from and travel west, 3,000, 4,000 miles, whatever. And when he came back from his first journey, he was no longer a poor man. He was now going to be a rich man. He was now going to be a celebrity. He was going to be the most famous person of his day, and probably one of the most famous people in history. And he did that because of the freedom of mobility. When we allow people to travel from one state to the next, to reinvent themselves, what we're doing really is we're allowing them to prosper, and we're also allowing our country to prosper. Look at Spain. Spain was a war-torn nation. It was bankrupt. It was poor. Columbus sails west, finds land, comes back. Spain becomes an empire. Spain becomes one of the richest countries in the world, just because of allowing Columbus to do what he wanted, allowing Columbus the freedom of movement to reinvent himself. You know, some people claim that Columbus wasn't sailing west, per se, for material gain, but rather for his religious aspects. He was a pious Catholic, and according to Carol Delaney in her book, Columbus and the Quest for Jerusalem, he was sailing west with the hope of meeting up with the Grand Khan of Asia and persuading him to gather an army, really, to take Jerusalem for the second coming of Christ. So this was a religious crusade, or a religious journey. Well, that also is tied to the freedom of movement. When we talk about freedom of religion here in the United States, and it's interesting about the United States, we're a modern country, we're a country that's quite prosperous, yet we're also very religious. And the reason for that, again, is because people can move and to another location from where they came from and start a church, start a congregation, a parish, whatever it is. That's tied to Columbus. The idea of worship, of faith, of religion, your freedom of religion, tied to mobility. You figure the Pilgrims that settled in Massachusetts eventually. You figure the French Huguenots, even some Italian Protestants actually were along with them when they settled in South Carolina and elsewhere. But more pointedly, you look at the Mormons. This was a religion that began in New York State in the 19th century, and almost immediately they were persecuted. They were assaulted for their faith. And what did they do? They moved west. They picked up from New York. They left New York. They left their home. America allowed them that freedom. And they went to Ohio and Illinois and all that area. They were being attacked by people because of their faith. It wasn't until they found Utah and they could settle there, to what later became Salt Lake City, that they were able to worship and live without harm, without interference. As the story goes, they were planting their crops, and right before cultivation, some locusts came, a whole army of locusts actually came, to attack their plants and their crops, and it was seagulls from the Salt Lake that came and ate the insects to save their harvest. And even today, I think when you go to Salt Lake City, there's a statue of seagulls there as emblematic of their of what they did to save the people. But it's the idea again of you being able to leave your home, go to a different place for whatever reason you want. I mean, look at the Mormons now. They've not only is their religious order, not only did it survive, but it's thriving. They're in Utah, maybe other places too out there in the West. But they couldn't do that if they weren't allowed to leave. And that's the thing about Columbus also. He left his home. He left the old world. He wanted to pursue perhaps a religious undertaking. He couldn't do that if he stayed there. He couldn't be Columbus if he wasn't allowed to leave. You know, we probably wouldn't even know who he was if Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand didn't sponsor his voyage to go west. He probably would have returned to the Merchant Marine. But he was limited. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't sail around Africa unless you were employed by one of the families there in Portugal or Spain that had that route. And then when you got to the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, you had to then pay a tribute or get permission from the Ottoman Turks. But he didn't do that. And this is another virtue of Columbus that's very American. It's action. We're people of action. And Columbus was a man of action. You know, people will write and say, oh, Columbus wasn't the only one of his day who knew that the world was round. Yeah, there were other people out there at his time in the 15th century that knew the world was round. Columbus wasn't the only one. But Columbus was the only one who acted on it. He understood the theory, but he was going to apply it to action. He was going to sail west. No one had done that before. He went to uncharted waters. And he settled there. Right? He didn't just go and leave like the Vikings, per se, did in Newfoundland. They stayed, but they left. They didn't establish any settlement. Columbus established a settlement. Again, it's the freedom of mobility. It's the freedom to move from your home, go to a different place, and purchase land there and settle. And it's also the idea of action. We take the theories, we take the ideas, and we apply it. And this is what you see all over the place. The World Wide Web was invented in Switzerland. But look what the Americans have done to it. Look how we've made it into this amazing marketplace. We took that idea and we applied it to the needs of consumers. And we've created this immense wealth. This is a very American trait and characteristic, and this is directly tied to Columbus. Before there was Columbus Day in 1892, and before it became a federal holiday in 1934, you can go back to 1792 as the first day when Columbus Day was celebrated. They did so back then to mark the 300th year anniversary of his discovery of America. And it was that day, for no coincidence, by the way, that they laid the cornerstone of the White House. And that's why they named the nation's capital, which is right there in the Constitution, after Christopher Columbus, the District of Columbia. Washington was going to be a city named after our first president, but the surrounding area, which originally encompassed Northern Virginia, was going to be the District of Columbia, and it was named after Columbus. You see, the Founding Fathers and those who revolted from the British, they embraced Columbus because of the reasons why I've just mentioned. The fact that he was a self-made man based on travel, based on movement, based on mobility. And it was the British that sought to degrade him, degrade his reputation and legacy, because he was representative of the Spanish Empire. And the British Empire and the Spanish Empire were rivals. So when we revolted and we had our own country, the British put us down by saying that we were the sons of Columbus, the Lilliputians, they said, of Columbiana. This is something that they stated. But we embrace that because, yeah, we are like Columbus. We are self-made people. And we're going to utilize our freedom of movement to pursue our religious freedom, our freedom to own property, our freedom to work and own businesses. And we're not going to have any permission from feudal lords or kings or princes. And this is exactly what Columbus did. And it was that role, Columbus as a role model, that led to establishing a key freedom, the freedom of movement, the freedom of mobility in the U.S. Constitution. And that is a main reason, a good reason, I think, to celebrate Columbus Day. It's not just that he was the first immigrant, the first Italian, the first Spaniard. A friend of mine, Angelo Vivolo of the Columbus Heritage Coalition, he has brought that to mind, that Columbus introduced the Hispanic culture, the Spanish culture here in the New World. And it's another reason why I think Spanish Americans and Hispanic Americans should celebrate Columbus Day. And the fact that he discovered a new world. But more than that, I think, is the fact that he left his home. He left the old world, and he was able to reinvent himself. And that is something that we all do here in the United States. And that is what makes us great. And that is why we should celebrate Columbus Day. So, I'll have more videos coming up about Columbus, about some ideas and thoughts I have about the discovery of the New World. He's a great figure of history, and we should be proud of him as Italian Americans, but also as Americans, I think. Proud that he serves as a model for our freedom and our prosperity. And so, I want to thank you for watching. God bless you, and I'll have more videos coming up. Thank you.